The Righteous Paladin started life as an Alliance-exclusive class, whilst the Horde had the Wise Shaman instead, though it wouldn't be long before TBC came around and gave both factions access to this versatile and powerful class. If you can say one thing about the Paladin's journey from vanilla to TBC and then Wrath, is that it's one of growth. There may not be another class that can match the jumps in power the Paladin experiences as the expansions progress. Still, even in the earlier versions of WoW, Paladin always had its niches where it could find its uses. Today we're going to be going over the Paladin in the classic Trilogy and finding out just how good they were overall. I'll be rating them on the following points: leveling, mainly for vanilla; PvE, so how well will a class do in raid and dungeon environments; are they stackable, so do people want to bring multiple of this class, how in demand will they be; their utility, what does this class bring to a group in terms of cooldowns and so on; and PvP, open world for vanilla again, battlegrounds, and of course arena. Each will be rated where 1 is poor, 2 below average, 3 average, 4 above average, and 5 amazing. So let's make a start and look at the Paladin in the classic Trilogy. We start as always with humble beginnings in vanilla. Whether it's in Northshire or Coldridge Valley, you have a whole lot of swinging and melee weapon ahead of you before you start to go anywhere on your Paladin. The Paladin leveling experience can best be described as being infamous. It kind of just is what it is, and what it is makes a slow-paced game like vanilla look even slower than usual. Whereas other classes get new spells and abilities as you level up, which impact how they deal damage in their rotation, on the Paladin you kind of get the gist of what 1 to 60 will be like by about level 4 or so. You use a seal, you swing a weapon, and sometimes you press judgment, and yeah, that'll just about do it. Saying that, there is something kind of fun about Paladin leveling at the same time, where you're so reliant on your weapon. It makes it so when you get an upgrade, you really feel the benefit of it. And when you get Seal of Command at level 20, that can lead to some pretty massive crits as well. And whilst Paladin leveling may feel slow, in reality they're one of the stronger leveling classes in vanilla, as where they may be lacking on the damage front of things, they certainly aren't lacking when it comes to utility and self-sustain. The Paladin simply has so many different buttons in their toolkit. Blessings such as freedom or protection, cleanse, hammer of justice, bubble, and lay on hands to name a few. There is also the option to go more of a protection build where you pick up consecration early and focus on dungeons or AoEing areas with undead. Consecration by itself isn't really that great in vanilla, to be honest, but if you can get yourself some decent gear on the auction house, this can be an okay alternative way to play, as opposed to just running around swinging your two-hander at stuff. The Paladin leveling is a bit of a mixed bag. Not the most exciting experience of any class, but safe and sturdy. And a 10 game for the Paladin for PvE, well, things are also variable in vanilla, shall we say. Let's start with talking about Paladin's DPS spec, Retribution. So as you'll probably know, vanilla raids, they're very easy, and you don't need a super optimized comp to clear by any stretch of the imagination. However, there's a reason most people trend towards the better DPS specs in the game. It's easier to find raid spots, and as it turns out, doing a lot of damage is often pretty fun, and Retribution, unfortunately, really isn't very good at doing damage for a damage spec, like whatsoever. It's considered a meme spec at 60 for a reason. Put it like this, for example, at the moment on Anniversary Realms, it's overall one of the lowest DPS classes in the game at the 90th percentile. And just to show you how many people are actually playing this in reality, there are about 70 warrior DPS players for every 1 Ret Pally. During Naxxramas in 2020, the ratio was over 1 to 80. And the truth is, people often just don't feel that good about giving loot to meme specs because of this, especially in pugs, because people may feel as though any base item going to a ret is kind of wasting the drop because it's not going to really impact your damage in any meaningful way compared to what it could have done on another class. I've said it before about Ret Pally, but the best skill you can have as a ret are social skills in your guild, so people enjoy having you around and seeing the token ret get gear. This really is not a spec to just passively raid log on. You've got to commit to being that guy who is the dedicated ret paladin. Well, this is true for raids at least. In dungeons, I actually think red is pretty good, provided you know, use your utility buttons, which, again, not everyone does. As for their other specs, well, let's talk protection next. Again, I think it's pretty good in dungeons actually, and in later game dungeons filled with undead that you can spam exorcism on, it's very good. Exorcism does a ton of threat. It's as if you did have a taunt. Your problems are of course mana regeneration with spamming consecration if you are indeed doing that, and the lack of a real taunt button. However, in raid, protection is even more problematic than retribution. See, on a ret, you're just a funny little guy in the crowd swinging your weapon about. You're not really doing much harm. On prot, you have a job to do, and that's hold threat, and your class is just not very good at doing that. Baseline protection really just doesn't work in raids. It wants too many stats at the same time, and itemization for it in the game is often non-existent. You really need a mix of stamina, defense, spell power, and intellect. You'll at best find 2 or 3 of those on items. Consecration is also pretty terrible when it comes to spell scaling and mana efficiency, meaning you'll run into severe mana problems, and nobody wants to wait for the tank to sit down and drink up in between pulls when any other relevant tank has a rage bar and is pressing W. On top of that, you don't have a taunt, so if somebody pulls threat, you better hope your next judgment crits or they're going to die. There is a method of tanking with prot pally that involves spamming Greater Blessing of Kings to generate threat. This works because it's a holy spell and therefore scales with bonus threat from Righteous Fury, but still it's just not as good as Feral or Warrior. To put it in perspective, on Anniversary Realms and NQ40, for every 1 prot paladin pass there are 280 warriors, and during Naxx Classic the ratio was 1 to 700. So yeah, prot paladins, leveling or dungeons, pretty good, I like them there. Raids, not really, no. Finally, Holy, and this is the meta spec for Paladin at endgame in Classic. It's the fate of many a Paladin who wants to wield their righteous weapon, only to get told to put on the blue dress and press Flash of Light. I mean, at least they work well in this role. Here the Paladin's utility heavy kit excels. They also have a talent called Illumination, which makes it so 100% of mana is refunded on spell crits, which is just crazy overpowered. With world buffs and gear, you just never ever go on this spec. The gameplay is also really simple. You find any health bar that isn't full and you press Flash of Light on it. You can also have some clutch moments too with Blessing of Protection and of course Lay on Hands. Also, you'll gradually get gear that you can use to go an AoE farm with on your Paladin whilst you raid. I had a Paladin ult from launch till midway through Blackwing Lure, and the raid healing may not have been the most interesting, but getting tier 2 for AoE farming, now that was worth it. In terms of demand for the Paladin, every Alliance raid wants at least 3 paladins for Kings, Might, and Salvation. Going up to 4 or 5 paladins is fine too, because some classes benefit from Wisdom and Might, and you can also put Blessing of Light on the tanks for bonus healing. As we've already talked about, Holy is the meta spec to supply these blessings as, and you can easily spec into Blessing of Kings as Holy as well. Though to be honest, a ret is fine if you're somehow missing a vital blessing, because any buff is better than none. The paladin's utility is where they excel. They just have so many useful cooldowns and buffs that we've really talked about. Blessing of Salvation by itself makes Alliance raiding way safer threat-wise than on Horde, and it's just an easily applied passive buff. For PvP, Paladin is actually pretty decent, primarily as retribution. There is of course Reckoning builds where you stack up extra attacks by getting crit by enemies and then just find some unfortunate person to one-shot, but it's a bit of a for fun meme build. It's not going to be consistent in any normal PvP encounter. Paladin can be annoying to deal with though, between all their various utility spells, Hammer of Justice, and just ways to heal. Overall in vanilla, Paladin is a super versatile class, and I really enjoyed having one as an ult. In fact, it really only falls down performance-wise when it comes to raiding, which is a bit of a problem since raiding is such a key endgame activity. Though this class's unique ability to create item sets to reflect damage and AoE farm is a super fun activity that only they can do in their particular way. But then of course we get on to the Burning Crusade, and things begin to really shape up for the Paladin, and their weaknesses at endgame start to get addressed. Let's start off with Retribution again. So in TBC, both factions received a new seal, those being Seal of Vengeance for Alliance and Seal of Blood for Horde. Originally these seals were faction specific, but in TBC Classic, Blizzard gave both seals to both factions to address concerns over raid-wide performance. This made a whole new way of playing accessible to both factions, seal twisting. This is basically swapping from one seal to another just as a melee swing is about to land, so you benefit from the on-hit effects of both seals at the same time. I find that people either really love or hate this style of gameplay, mainly because you absolutely need a swing timer so you can track when you should be changing seals to ensure that you twist correctly. In TBC, everyone also has Wind Fury because both factions have shamans now too, so at its best with seal twisting you could attack up to 6 times in one global, and when it happens it's honestly probably the most fun you can have on any DPS spec in TBC, provided you don't instantly over aggro when the boss turns around and one-shots you, that is. In terms of actual DPS performance, well, it's an improvement over vanilla. It would be hard to not improve over that, but you definitely aren't going to be top of the damage meter either. In reality, you'll often be somewhere in the middle of the pack, maybe in the upper levels of the damage meters, which is just fine really. At least the spec is fun to play though, unlike some other classes which, although they do good damage, are not very engaging. I'm talking about Warlock. As for protection, this spec also sees massive improvements compared to vanilla. Now you have a real taunt in Righteous Defense, and Blizzard actually started making useful tanking gear for protection Paladin. Thanks for that, Blizz, only took you 3 years. Mana issues are also helped with spiritual attunement, and your AoE threat is absolutely premium. It's the best by far. Basically, all the core issues with protection that made it bad in raiding in vanilla are addressed in TBC, and because of that, Protection Paladin will see a ton more play in the expansion. It's an amazing pick for both dungeon content as well as raids. It does have some leftover issues from vanilla, such as not really having any defensive cooldowns, and Avenger's Shield has a cast time for some reason, so you can only use it to pull. But apart from that, protection is really fun. It's also worth knowing that protection isn't as good main tanking as Feral Druid due to threat generation. When in a raid, you're more often going to be there for off tanking, trash, or just an AoE tank role, so be aware of that. Finally, Holy is in more or less the same place that it was in vanilla, except instead of pressing Flash of Light, now you press Holy Light instead, and that's more or less all there is to it. They're really there for a blessing and they're good consistent single target heals. So is the Paladin stackable now in TBC, or how in demand will they be? Well, ideally every single comp in TBC, at least in 25 player raids that is, will benefit heavily from having one of each spec from the Paladin. Protection's key strength is AoE threat, rep for the buffs and upkeep on debuffs on the boss, and Holy for heals and a blessing. 3 Paladins also cover the key blessings of Salvation, Kings, and Might or Wisdom. Really, the Paladin is in a place where you always want 3, but you never really need more than that. Equally, there's not much of a demand to have more than one of each spec too. I mean, if you are missing a blessing, having 2 ret or maybe Holy Paladins will be fine, but you don't really want to go beyond that. So there will be a good level of demand for Paladin, but it's absolutely spread across all of their specs. The Paladin's utility remains excellent, and this is the thing that really gets them into raids. It's a lot of the same cooldowns as vanilla though, such as Freedom, Blessing of Protection, Lay on Hands, all of that good stuff. But now you also have some spec specific bonuses too, such as Retribution, providing bonus damage auras, and keeping Judgment debuffs up on the boss through Crusader Strike. As for PvP, things are better compared to vanilla, but still not amazing. First up, Protection doesn't work, does no damage, so that's not something to think about. Holy is reasonable, but you're very vulnerable to being focused because your only instant cast spell is Holy Shock, which is better compared to vanilla, but it really doesn't do too much healing. And if you get interrupted, your entire spellbook is Holy, so that's not good either. Also, Priests can now mass dispel your bubble in TBC too, don't forget about that. I have seen people make Holy Paladin work at higher ratings, but it's not very popular, and it's difficult to play because it can be shut down easily by coordinated players. Ret I'd say is your best pick for TBC Arena, however it's one massive casino spec. Basically, you're going to be playing with a shaman at all times and seal twisting in the hope that Wind Fury and your on-hit effects proc at the same time and just randomly global someone. Overall, the Paladin feels much improved in TBC, with all 3 specs finding raid spots consistently. On Anniversary, we're going to have dual spec too, so you can lock in a raid spec and a protection one for AoE farms or dungeons, which is going to be so nice to have. And then we get to Wrath of the Lich King. If the Paladin saw improvements in TBC, this expansion just takes takes it all the way up to 11. Or eventually it does anyway. So let's start with Retribution again. So you may remember from Wrath's launch in 2008 just how totally insane Ret Paladin was back then. And if you didn't, I can tell you, you kind of just rolled your face on the keyboard and you were among the top DPS, or you could win any PvP fight. The spec was way overtuned. So what happened over the course of Wrath back then was Ret got gradually nerfed to fit in line with the power gains from the expansion. Most notably during the ICC patch, Ret had probably the most powerful DPS tier set ever, where melee attacks had a 40% chance to reset the cooldown on Divine Storm, and you could get a Shadowmourne as well. So when Wrath Classic came out with this nerf state of Ret, without 2-piece tier 10 and Shadowmourne, they were kinda just bad. Like, really bad in fact. We can go and check logs from tier 7 and see they're competing with warriors for the bottom of the DPS meters, which is not what a lot of people are expecting from Ret in Wrath. In fact, things got so bad for Ret and they were underperforming so much compared to expectations that Blizzard actually went and did, for the first time ever, a set of direct buffs to a spec in Classic. This did bump up the power level of Ret in Ulduar from near the bottom to somewhere in the middle of the damage meters. They still weren't doing anything special though. However, in Trial of the Grand Crusader, Ret began to improve a lot more with gear scaling, and by ICC, where it had all the items the spec was balanced around, Ret began to show its true colours as one of the stronger melee DPS classes in the game. The playstyle of Ret also completely changes compared to TBC 2, which you may or may not be happy to hear about, which is why I'm mentioning it. Seal twisting is completely gone and is replaced with a priority-based cooldown rotation instead. So for Ret in Wrath, it doesn't start well whatsoever with how we know it played out in Classic, but by ICC it's back near the top of the damage meters. For Prot Paladin, they improve massively compared to TBC, and they are just straight up overpowered in Wrath, having the best cooldowns, amazing single target and AoE threat, and the best survivability. Avenger's Shield is now instant and silences instead of dazing, Hammer of the Righteous helps massively on AoE threat, and you have Ardent Defender, which acts like a cheat death type effect passively on a 2-minute cooldown. Any mana problems you could have still had from TBC are gone, and Protection Paladin became the main tank to play in Wrath. In fact, you could see raids running 2 Protection Paladins as their tanks. There really wasn't any downside to be doing this. Holy Paladin was also incredibly strong and was the most popular healer throughout the whole of Wrath. All raids would want to run at least 2 Holy Paladins. For Holy, Avenging Wrath now affected healing, it was only damage in TBC, Sacred Shield would apply a ton of shields and heals passively, Divine Illumination halved their mana cost for a while, and biggest of all was Beacon of Light, which copied 100% of their heals over to a second target. Whilst the Holy Paladin really didn't do any AoE healing whatsoever, their ability to just focus on single target heals was incredibly important in Wrath of the Lich King, because there were so many fights where the tank just got constantly chunked, such as Algalon, Anubarak or Lich King. Out of every expansion for the Paladin, there is going to be the most demand for them in Wrath by far. As mentioned earlier, you could run 2 Prot and 2 Holy Paladins in your raid, no problem. Retribution is the odd one out because it does end up being good eventually, but it's not something you're gonna have more than one of up until Trial of the Grand Crusader really. Paladin's utility is at its peak in Wrath, mainly because of one talent, Divine Guardian. This is an upgrade to the Divine Sacrifice talent, which makes it so all raid members take 20% reduced damage for 6 seconds. Just remember to cancel or other part of the ability that actually redirects damage to yourself as the Paladin, or you're going to get one shot. I swear every Paladin has to learn this once. No other class in the game has a raid cooldown like this, and all Paladin specs pick up this talent. On so many bosses, using DSAC at the right time is critical to the success of the encounter, and it is the most important ability in the game. This alone would have made multiple Paladins worth bringing, but on top of that, 2 out of 3 of their specs are just straight up overpowered, and things such as Blessing of Freedom or Protection are now changed to Hands in Wrath, Hand of Protection, Hand of Freedom, so they don't even overlap your other buffs anymore. Also for Ret specifically, they do bring a raid-wide 3% damage buff. The other choices for this buff are BM Hunter, which no one's going to be playing, or Arcane Mage, which people will be playing early, but they're going to be swapping to fire mid-Ulduar if I remember right. So you do always want to Ret Pally in your raid for this buff, 100% of the time. For PvP, the Paladin is also in an amazing place. Holy can do far more whilst remaining on the move now, and has the Sacred Cleansing talent, which makes it so when you dispel things, your target has a chance to become way more resistant to future debuffs. Retribution has a much more consistent damage profile with their new abilities that get added in Wrath, and sees a place in a number of comps across all brackets. There is also this weird hybrid Paladin spec called Preg Pala. This uses a fast one-hander and a shield. It aims to mainly deal damage through Judgment and Shield of the Righteous, and because they use a fast weapon, they get a ton of procs from the Art of War talent in the Ret tree, which makes either their next Flash of Light or Exorcism instant. This is kind of like a Prot Holy Ret Paladin all in one, and it makes them super annoying to focus due to how well built they are defensively, and hard to ignore because, I mean, it's a Paladin in Wrath, they just do a lot of damage in general. Overall in Wrath of the Lich King, Holy and Protection are two amazing picks which you literally cannot go wrong with. They will be very in demand and super powerful. Retribution is the spec which will be wanted as well, but don't really expect to be doing that much damage until Trial of the Grand Crusader and beyond. The class as a whole is definitely in its strongest spot during Wrath of the Lich King though, and it is rather fittingly its peak expansion. And that is a roundup of how the Paladin performs during the classic trilogy. Definitely one of the classes to see the most changes in my opinion, and one which goes from having meme specs to being, without a doubt, the best at some of their roles. Let me know your experiences on the Paladin and whether you would consider giving it another go throughout Classic in the comments down below. And as always, thank you all so much for watching and listening in, and I'll see you all in the next one very soon.